Good afternoon again, folks. Here we are, clear into the going into the second week of June. The history marches on. Starting in 1899, the Department of Army stated that the president had directed in May that a new military post be located in Eagle City, further to be known as Fort Egbert, after the late Harry C. Egbert, Colonel and Brigadier General of the Volunteers, who was killed while gallantly leading his regiment into action at Malinta, Philippines, in March of 26th of 1899. In 1901, the 520-ton three-masted whaling Baleena sails out of San Francisco on April 4th on its 14th journey to the Arctic for the whaling grounds. On this day, is lost in a Bering Sea storm near St. Lawrence Island. The fate of her crew was never known. 1913, Hudson Stuck, Harry Karstens, Walter Harper, and Robert Tatum, after near misses and outright failures of previous climbers, conquered Denali, better known to us elders as Mount McKinley. Athabascan Walter Harper would become the first person known to summit the 2,320-foot Mount McKinley. Denali. Hudson Stuck was the one of the first to use the name Denali in place of Mount McKinley. 1940, Major E.M. George, the Army's construction quartermaster, arrives in Anchorage from Ladd Field, hires a few dozen local men, and begins clearing land and begins working on construction of an Army post and an Anchorage air base. 1943, on the 8th of June, the first passenger ship lands at Whittier with passengers continuing on to Anchorage by train. In 1999, just about 16 years ago on this date, a 212-year-old tree, old enough to have witnessed Captain Cook's expedition passing, belonging to Jim Skogstad of Hope. He donated a tree right next to his sauna to be cut down by logger Bill Miller, with numerous witnesses on site, including the former and current mayor of Nome, Leo Rasmussen, and John Handlin. The tree then was trimmed, skinned of its bark by youngsters of Hope. Next, the tree would go to Bob Kuiper's shop, a Sterling wood craftsman, to carve, shape, and finish the log into a new burled arch monument for the Iditarod Trail race, finish line monument. And so the monument started its long trip to Nome to become that burled arch, where all Iditarod mushers, upon completing their race across Alaska, must cross and go under for an official completion of the race. The original arch at the end of the Iditarod was gifted and created by an Iditarod veteran, Red Fox Olson, who, upon finishing the great race in 1974, knew what the Iditarod needed to honor a successful completion of the race by every musher crossing the finish line in Nome. With a fundraising effort in Nome to pay for the transportation from Fairbanks of the first and new monument, it fulfilled its duties till it came crashing down in 1999. While the 9th of June, while at the Golden Gate Hotel in Nome, Godfrey Cheelander, who had been hired by Governor John Brady to collect exhibits in Alaska for the Lewis and Clark Fair in Portland, Oregon, spending 2 months in Alaska, realizes that Alaska is far too big a territory to push in a short time frame. Therefore, while in Nome, writes to Johnny Chilberg, urging Seattle's Alaska Club, of which Chilberg was president, to sponsor an Alaska exposition in Seattle in 1909. Thus, the beginning of the Alaska-Yukon Pacific Exposition in 1909. Still a lot of relics from that one around, and the last real showtime for Alaska in the lower 48. 1906, the 72-year-old Bishop William Carpenter Bumpus in 1885 begins a 5-year journey from London arriving at Fort Simpson, Yukon Territory, beginning his ministry till he arrives at Fort Yukon, sitting on a box writing the sermon that would be his last on this evening. The pen stopped. He stood and leaned his elbows on a pile of books, fell forward. His labors were over. 1933, Donald E. Young. School teacher, riverboat captain, born in Meridian, California, marries Lulu Fredson in Fort Yukon, February 22, 1863. Teacher, Fort Yukon, 1960 to 68. City councilman, Fort Yukon, 1960 to 64. Mayor, Fort Yukon, 1964 to 68. Alaska State Representative, 1967 to 71. Alaska State Senator, 1971 to 73. Resigning to become U.S. Congressman, 1973 to the current day. Riverboat captain on the Yukon River, 1969 to 72. National Education Association Alaska Executive Board, 1963-67. Our very own U.S. Congressman. 1943 in the 10th of June. Freighter SS Turabal arrives with a cargo of food. The garrison had fresh meat issued for the first time on Atka. The 11th of June, 1980. Ernest Forrest Jessen, newspaper editor, publisher, born in Washington in 1890, visits brother in Fairbanks in 1905, establishes delivery business, returns to Seattle, continues schooling, went to Cordova to enter the crabbing business, but financial problems turned him into a reporter at the Cordova Times, 1910 to 1919. He was a reporter, Anchorage Times, cartoonist, and Pathfinder magazine, Anchorage 1919 to 1923. Editor and general manager of Anchorage, Alaska, 1923-24. Established advertising agency in Anchorage, 24 to 25. Owner, operator, Seward Gateway, 1925 to 1938. Editor, Fairbanks News Miner Weekly and Alaska Weekly Miner, 1938 to 42. Established and published Jessen's Weekly, 1942 to 1961, and then Daily, 1961 to 1971. Dies in Fairbanks, March 26, 1971. There you have it, another snapshot of our history spanning the decades. On to next week. We'll see.